After Venezuelans went to the polls to vote for a special assembly with powers to rewrite the constitution, what will be the long-term repercussions for that country? And this past year has been bad for women politicians, with high-profile cases of impeachments and resignations hitting the headlines. Do women make good politicians? And just how much gender equality is there in politics? Welcome to The Point. I'm Zhou Yue, sitting in for Liu Xin. Venezuela's National Electoral Council says more than 8 million voters participated in Sunday's controversial election for a new constituent assembly. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro hailed it as the biggest ever vote for the revolution, and the number is more than double the predicted estimates of both the government's political opponents and independent experts. The poll was held to elect a special assembly with powers to rewrite the crisis-hit country's 1999 constitution. While Maduro believes the assembly will be a grand dialogue ending violence for Venezuelans, opposition party officials argue the vote is a power grab meant to give Maduro dictatorial powers. At least 123 people have died since opposition-led protests aimed at toppling the government began in April. While the historic election has provoked a wide-range response from across the international political spectrum. So, who are the winners and losers in this election, and how will the results from the vote affect business and the economy in that country? To answer these, in Caracas, we're joined by Phil Gunson, a senior analyst at the International Crisis Group. Phil, voting was extended by an hour on Sunday, we were told. Venezuela's opposition say they stationed their observers at every polling site and only saw a small part of turnout seen in previous election voted, while the government side says the number of voters was double many of the pre-election predictions. So, based your experience in Caracas, which number of turnout is more credible?
I think the lower number is much more credible. It's a government with a very low popularity rating. Mr. Maduro has, by the latest poll, only around 17% support. And this was an election as well in which there were very few checks and balances. Traditionally in Venezuela, under this government and the predecessor government of Hugo Chavez, the votes have always apparently been counted accurately. But this time we really don't know. Voters, for example, were not asked to dip their fingers in indelible ink to check for double voting. They were able to vote at more or less any polling station that they felt like. And I think there's very little credibility to the number of votes the Electoral Council announced, especially because this is roughly the same amount of votes that Hugo Chavez got at the height of his powers back in 2012 before he died of cancer. So I think, unfortunately, the Electoral Council and the government here is trying to pull the wool over our eyes.
And is there any international observers on the ground? And for those people who didn't go to vote, are they showing their disapproval of the government, or they simply don't care?
Well, there were no international observers as such. The CNE, the Electoral Council, doesn't allow observers. It allows people to do what it calls accompanying the vote. And as far as the opposition is concerned, yesterday they tried to protest on the streets. They were dispersed quite violently in some cases by National Guard and policemen. And in the afternoon they put up barricades, some of which I had to cross to get to the studio today. I think there's every chance that there's going to be more trouble if you cut off genuine, free and fair elections, if you cut off the democratic and peaceful route to change, then there's every likelihood, of course, that we'll see violence. And as you mentioned in your introduction, well over 100 people have already died in the last few months.
And what exactly is this Constituent Assembly? Why there is such a strong opposition to such a vote, and what will come out of this vote?
Well, the Assembly, nominally under the Constitution, is supposed to write a new Constitution. It's supposed to restructure the state, or at least make significant amendments to the Constitution. But the opposition says, and I think they're right, that what Mr. Maduro is trying to do is to use this constitutional trick to stay in power indefinitely. The Assembly has no limit, no time limit on the length of its deliberations. It becomes sovereign. It can do anything. It can and probably will immediately close down the elected parliament, which is run by the opposition. May well put many of the opposition leaders in jail. And essentially what Mr. Maduro is doing through this is becoming a dictator. The vote was not in any sense free and fair. The opposition boycotted it because the system of voting ensured that whatever happened, the government would have a majority despite its very low rating in the polls. So as I say, I think we're in for a very difficult time for Venezuela.
But actually last year the opposition themselves called for a new constituent assembly. So they didn't support the same thing, just the idea of this thing.
Well, yes, the idea of rewriting the Constitution and changing all the current institutions in the country, the Supreme Court, the Electoral Tribunal and so on, was something that was supported by not all the opposition, but a part of the opposition. Because clearly the problem that they have at the moment is that the executive in the hands of Mr. Maduro, even before this vote, dominated the Supreme Court, dominated the electoral authority, and and the opposition was unable to make use of the power that on paper it had through its control of the National Assembly. So that was an idea that some people in the opposition thought might work. But of course Mr. Maduro took that idea and transformed it because, first of all, he never asked the electorate whether they wanted one. And then, of course, as I say, he instituted a system of voting which wasn't fair.
And in your opinion, what is the fundamental reasons of this political turmoil in Venezuela? Is it because of the economic troubles? Because we understand that Venezuela actually has the largest supply of crude oil, but the crude prices has been low for quite some time. Is it bad management of the economy, or is it simply bad luck?
Well, there's a political element and an economic element. In politics, ever since Maduro's predecessor Chavez came to power in '99, the government has been seeking to reduce the number of checks and balances and concentrate power in its own hands. But so long as the economy worked okay, that was fine with the majority of Venezuelans. They kept re-electing Mr. Chavez, and they elected Mr. Maduro in 2013. But Chavez died, the oil price slumped, the economy, as you say, has been very badly managed. Oil, although there's a lot of oil under the ground, the amount produced has fallen dramatically by about 1 million barrels a day since Chavez came to power. And a lot of other things have gone wrong with economic management. So people now are suffering tremendously in Venezuela.
And now we have another expert on the line. That's Jason Marczak, who is the director of the Latin American Economic Growth Initiative, Atlantic Council. Well, Jason, what do you make of the reasons of the political turmoil in Venezuela? And do oppositions have any plans to turn things around? What is their getting at?
Well, thank you very much. I mean, I think that, first of all, the turmoil in Venezuela is due to the economic and humanitarian crisis that has been going for a number of years, but has reached a historic boiling point. So you combine with that with that the opposition did win not only a majority in National Assembly a year ago, and the government has moved to systematically take away powers from the National Assembly over the course of the last year and a half, and now you have this boiling point. Yesterday's vote, where the government would sort of take away the last remaining democratic checks that still exist in the country.
And Phil, do you think the new assembly, with this kind of a vote turnout, will come up with any solutions politically and economically for Venezuela, Phil?
No, I don't. The Constitutional Assembly election was a farce from the beginning. The Constitution, written by Hugo Chavez in 1999, says that before a Constituent Assembly convenes, that the people must first decide whether they want a constituent assembly or not. That never happened. The government automatically decided that it would convene a constituent assembly, and when you look at the 6,000 candidates that were up for election yesterday, they were all supporters of the government, and the degree of polarization that exists between the opposition and the government, and that's partly sparked by the fact that you've had a number of rounds of talks over the years, brokered by respectable international mediators, all of which the end result was for the government to try to use them to buy time and to renege on their promises. And so the polarization that exists, I think, was only going to deepen once this constitutional assembly takes power.
And Phil, do you agree with Jason?
Yes, I think the government of Mr. Maduro had many opportunities following his election in 2013 to put the economy right. In fact, he said he was going to do it on at least half a dozen different occasions. He had control before 2016 of the National Assembly, that's the country's parliament.
What in particular do you think he missed out?
Well, this is an economy which has been strangled by regulation. The government has expropriated large swathes of manufacturing industry, for example, farmland as well. It's instituted extremely tough price and exchange controls, which have strangled private business. The companies that the government has taken over don't produce anything or produce very little. It's really a disastrous economic policy, and the government needs to do a U-turn on that at the earliest possible opportunity. I just don't think it will.
And the international response. The vote has divided Venezuela's neighbors. Bolivia and Nicaragua send congratulations. Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, Mexico, and Peru rejected the results. And the United States has slapped new sanctions on Venezuela. So what does it mean for this country's economy and politics?
Which one of us?
Phil?
From my point of view, I think as far as the international situation is concerned, it's only going to make things worse. The sanctions that the United States is talking about, bearing in mind that most of what Venezuela earns internationally, most of the dollars coming into the country, come from oil sales to the United States. And although we're not going to see a ban, I don't think, immediately on oil imports from Venezuela to the United States, the restrictions that are being talked about could severely hit an already badly damaged oil industry. And the immediate impact probably will be felt by ordinary Venezuelans on the street with more difficulty for getting food and basic goods.
And let's talk about China a little bit. China is Venezuela's biggest creditor. Report by Bloomberg says it gives China stronger say in Venezuela's future. But China's stance has always been non-interference. How do you think China should do to protect its interests? And should China do anything about it?
Well, I think it's clear that the Chinese have a great deal of leverage because Venezuela owes them a lot of money. And there are significant Chinese interests here in the oil industry as well. I think what the Chinese government needs to bear in mind is that the best way to ensure a healthy, productive, profitable relationship for both sides is for there to be a viable government and a viable economic policy in Venezuela. If the current situation persists, then what's going to happen is that oil production is going to slump. It's going to be impossible, not viable for foreign investors like the Chinese to really put money in and create a productive economy to make money here, and also to get their money back, because if Venezuela is broke, of course, it won't be able to pay China what it owes.
That's not something good for China, obviously. Thank you so much, Phil, for your take on this. And here is my first point. On July the 16th, more than 7 million Venezuelans arguably voted in the plebiscite held by the opposition-controlled National Assembly to reject President Maduro's plans to rewrite the Constitution. And since then, the opposition have taken steps to establish a parallel government. Well, this might remain a symbolic initiative. If the opposition continued down the road, it will soon be looking for international recognition and funding, and will at least be implicitly asserting the parallel government's claim to monopoly and some use of the force. But if it succeeds, Venezuela could plunge into a civil war. It used to have an economy that was among the most successful in South America, Venezuela, which is now a shadow of the former self. Food and medicine have all disappeared from the shelves. Inflation doubles the price of food each week. It is said that the average weight of Venezuelan has been reduced by 10 kilos. And according to International Monetary Fund, GDP is now 35% below 2013 level. That is a sharper contraction than during the Great Depression in the U.S., when U.S. GDP was estimated to have fallen 28%. So Venezuela is the world's most indebted and troubled country. Without concerted international efforts, the future for it is very bleak. And watching The Point. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Japan's Defense Minister Tomomi Inada resigned last Friday following allegations she helped to suppress the release of sensitive defense documents. Well, this is the latest blow to Prime Minister Shinzo Abe as his popularity continues to dive. It is quite the opposite of Abe's expectations when he appointed women members to his cabinet last year in a bid to boost his approval rating. Debates followed about how reliable or unreliable women politicians can be. Some say women are too emotional, unpredictable to be politicians. Two women presidents, the ROK's Park Geun-hye and Brazil's Dilma Rousseff, have been impeached in a year. Others argue, well, there are prominent women who are doing well, like former UK Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher and German Chancellor Angela Merkel. Or they can do even better. So do women make good politicians? Would the world be different if women ruled the world? Meanwhile, sexual politics in China is slightly different in that there has been no suffragette movement. The women were given the right to vote in 1940s. The position of vice premier is as far as women politicians have reached up till now. So, will they rise even further in the future? And how can gender parity be promoted in China? Joining me from Washington, D.C. is Lucy Getman, adjunct instructor of the Department of Government at American University, and here in Beijing, Professor Li Jinzhao at Beijing Foreign Studies University. Welcome to this show, ladies. And politics used to be seen as a male sphere, and yet there are increasingly more women politicians in the world stage, and some of them prominent. What do you make of this trend, and is it really more difficult for women to become politicians and survive in this political world, Miss Li?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me here. There are a lot of reasons that contribute to the rise of women in politics worldwide. There is the rise of women in education, in workforce, and also the rise of women's awareness that they should have more autonomy, self-autonomy, life autonomy, and body autonomy. So I certainly hope to see this as a continuous trend, meaning more women will be in power in politics, as the 20th century is the century for women.
You agree, Lucy, the 21st century will see more women politicians?
Good evening. Yes, I absolutely agree, in part because women have always had a role in public life, whether running family firms and businesses, whether being active politically and engaged civically, or as actual candidates. Women have long held important roles in public life, and the events of this year, the groundbreaking and historic candidacy of a woman in the United States for president is just one indication of the progress that we're making, and I think that will continue.
But it seems some women politicians haven't been performing that well. Former U.S. Secretary of State from your country, Hillary Clinton, she lost the presidential election, some say because she is a woman, and Park Geun-hye here in Asia also being tried for corruption. Theresa May in the United Kingdom didn't do so well. Are they just isolated cases, or they didn't perform well because they are women?
Who should answer?
Thank you for that question.
Lucy, please, first.
Oh, thank you. I view the candidacy of Ms. Clinton a little differently, again, because this was an historic presidential race. Never before in our country's history have we had a woman at the top of a ticket of a major party. Since then, there's been an overwhelming groundswell of interest among women in running for office in the future. I also look to the success we've had in Congress, where we have more women serving than in the past. And for example, in the U.S. Senate, we added 2 more Asian Pacific Islander women to the U.S. Senate. So I think we need to look broadly at women's electoral experience and success, because there's a lot to celebrate.
Yes. And Ms. Lee, do you think there are more difficulties and challenges for a woman to become a politician in any country?
Definitely, at this time stage and the beginning of the 21st century, women are really witnessing more obstacles, more challenges than male candidates and politicians, because they do not have to worry about how they are judged by their political performance and their potentials. As a politician, they are also judged by their appearance, their gendered, stereotypical gender roles. So definitely women are witnessing more resistance and more pressure, more obstacles in running for offices.
You mentioned stereotypes. It seems in some feminist theories there are physiological gender and social gender. It is true that women entering more areas than used to be, but still it seems there is still a lack of real gender equality in the society. Ms. Lee?
Well, I think many countries in the world are progressing in terms of gender parity. We see more women faring better and being more competent than men in higher education, in being leading scientists, and in being leading social activists and politicians, government officials. But on the other hand, we also see a lot of resistance. So it's a really tough call for all these, I call them the pioneer women politicians,
but
who are interested in public sphere.
Stylistically and practically, Lucy, do you think women politicians, they practice different kind of politics, or is it just similar like male counterparts?
Well, I think it's important to note that, you know, women are not a monolith. Women are as diverse as men in terms of, you know, their backgrounds and their political perspectives and their personalities. I do, however, think there is an element of gender in seeking and serving in political office. For example, in the United States, over 40% of locally elected school board members are women, making it a very powerful location of political leadership. But of course, education is an area where women have long held leadership roles, whether as educators and teachers or within the family. So I think it's important to recognize that as more women enter politics, they will, of course, adapt to the political culture. But again, the more we have, the more the political culture will adapt to them.
And also political culture differs in different countries.
Right.
Here in Asia, women are pictured, you can say it's stereotype, as docile and obedient. So compared with the Western counterparts, is it more difficult or is it easier for Asian women to become political leaders? Ms. Lee?
Well, to a certain extent, in Asia, in order to be successful as political candidates and leaders, you join a kind of team. So if you are the lower team, then you have to follow orders and be obedient to your superiorities. Everybody has to climb up that political ladder. So I don't think that only women need to follow orders. Men also need to follow orders in order to be successful followers, and then they can join higher ranks. And I also want to emphasize that cultures can change. For instance, in the United States, Chinese American women are faring better than Chinese American men in all different levels of political participation. For instance, at state level, 40% of Chinese politicians who have run successfully at all elections are women. So the percentage, which is 40%, is much, much higher as compared to the provincial level of Chinese women leaders and officials. So in that aspect, Chinese women in China can learn immensely from Chinese American women in the United States.
Since 1949, since the People's Republic of China was founded, we just have 4 female vice premiers, and so far we haven't seen any women politicians make their way to the standing committee members of the Politburo, the highest hierarchy of the political structure here in China. Do you think there will be a chance of a woman becoming top-level politicians in China someday?
I guess that question is for me.
Yes.
As far as I know, after the 18th Party Congress, among the 25 standing members of the Politburo, 2 are women. One is Vice Premier Liu Yandong, and the other is the Secretary, the Minister of Frontier Works, which is the Minister of Public Affairs, in liaisoning with other political offices.
I'm sorry, we're running out of time, but thank you very much, Lucy, and also thank you very much, Ms. Li, for your analysis and insights on this. And here's my last point. While politics as a profession is notorious for permitting and even celebrating macho behavior, this excludes not just the women, but those who isn't willing to conform to male world. Well, the general notion in Nigeria, for instance, that women are inferior to men, and even some politicians think the role of their wives did not extend beyond the kitchen, despite the fact that women in Nigeria made their mark in political and economic arena. But simply body counting the number of women probably doesn't mean equality. Cultural change takes a lot longer. It is easy to underestimate some of the sex cultures can be in the face of social changes, especially in parliament chambers and government offices. But gender equality is not just a human rights issue. It's key for development and peace of the world. The sky will not hold if there's only half of it. That's it for this edition of The Point. As always, you can follow us on Twitter or visit our Facebook page using handle @ThePointWithLX. I'm Joel. Goodbye.